She won most talkative in high school, and she has been running her mouth ever since. Welcome to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast with your host, Lisa Fisher.
Okay, kids, this is going to be another good one. I've been on this quest, I guess. I've always been on a quest, Dr. Lori, for truth tellers, but recently it's just kind of come into my path. Now I'm looking for truth tellers in the world of oncology and the things of medicine that has really been a holy grail and has never been touched because we've always been told there's one way to do it, and it's called chemo and radiation. But now I'm talking to all these outliers that are going, you know what? You don't have to do it that way. And part of your message as a naturopathic physician is probably alternative treatment. Tell me how you got interested in the field of oncology.
Sure. Yeah. So I was raised as basically a naturopath without even knowing. I actually repelled a lot of what my mom was saying because it just seemed too easy. She'd say, get out in sunshine, drink more water, just
Right.
foundational human needs. And I would always fight it. And I would say, no, I need to go to the doctors and get an antibiotic like my friends. And I need to go on this medication because if I don't feel well, I need a pill to fix me. And that was very much my upbringing where my mom would, no, Lori, let's get you some vitamin C and some natural antibacterials. So for my whole life, I was kind of like shoved medicine, like natural medicines down my throat. And I wanted to repel it because it was very weird back then to get like bean sprouts in my lunch and to get sesame seeds in my Rice Krispies. Like she would sneak in anything possible. And so for a long time, I really, no one wants to listen to their mother. Their mothers are always crazy, right? Like, what do they know?
All the time I say this.
Right. And then it was later in high school, when I was applying to universities, a light bulb went off and I figured, wow, I'm never sick. Like I'm hardly ever sick. And my friends are, getting their appendix out and their tonsils out and sick all the time, having migraines and missing out on all these events. So when I decided which medical school I wanted to go to, as much as I didn't want to say, okay, mom, there's something to this. That's what I ended up doing is taking all the electives, all of the physiologies, biologies, and really understanding the why. So not just, okay, this healthier option is better for you, but how come? How come our gut is affecting our immune system the way it does? How does stress and our gut-brain axis play a role? So for me, I always have been an investigator, and cancer is kind of like the ultimate. And Same with what you're saying, like autoimmune conditions. And why is the immune system attacking itself? Why are these cells mutated and turning on? Like, what is actually happening before that diagnosis occurs? So the diagnosis is just like a fancy, it's a symptom, right? There's a tumor there. That's a symptom of a whole metabolic effect going on previously. So understanding the whys is such a big part of my life in general. And I think people should question that. Like, why is that happening? Why? Like, be that annoying person and try to figure out every single detail of why it's happening, not just slapping a pill. And what I would have loved 20 years ago, and most people do, that's a very easy thing to do. Just take a pill and move on. But yeah, it's always going to come back. You're going to have that same vicious cycle of things happening again and again if you're not going to the whys.
Now, conventional medicine coined the term functional medicine probably 20 years ago, but naturopaths may have really been the OG, as the kids say, of people looking into why are you sick?
Exactly. And we know a lot of cancers are actually stemmed from a parasite, from a virus, from bacteria. We know that even with stomach cancer, H. pylori is the leading cause, or with lymphomas, a lot of viral Epstein-Barr virus, there's been connections there. So we know how pathogens play a role in affecting our immune system and the dysfunction there, even with mold species, what you're exposed to. So exactly, it's really going down to the foundational, looking at what your body's exposed to and how we can start cleaning up and using nature. Like, what in our environment can we change and enhance?
Don't we say that all of us have cancer cells right now, right?
Exactly. They actually did a study. I'll give you the name. Dr. Kawabauchi. Anyways, there's a doctor who did a study on this to see what the circulating tumor cells and what the cancer rates are of a group of 1,000 people. There was one person out of the 1,000 that didn't have cancer in their body,
Wow.
and these are people that didn't think that they have cancer. So you're right. We always have circulating cancer cells, and it's up to our immune system to recognize this, our natural killer cells to activate and to be able to get rid of these abnormal cells. So we're constantly in this battle per se of our immune system just knowing what to do. And it's all of the other factors like toxicity, like cortisol, stress, infections that disrupt and kind of confuse how our immune system naturally, innately knows to fight cancer.
Yeah, you'll see people after a stressful period, after a divorce, after financial collapse, they get diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
So it's really the cortisol. We know, I mean, the more I understand cortisol, what a double-edged sword it is, in that we need it. It's like insulin. Insulin's kind of a smoking gun of things. We need it, but too much of it has made us sick. Same thing with cortisol. And the thing with insulin, though, we can often control by our diet. Cortisol, we have to manipulate with our lifestyle, right?
Yeah, have to make changes. Yeah, and it's interesting because I see that all the time in practice where they say, as soon as, this stressful event, I know that's what caused my cancer.
Yeah.
And even on a biochemistry level, like we're all born with these tumor suppressor genes, right? So BRCA1, BRCA2, P53, there's a whole bunch that we're just born with to be able to suppress cancer or to kill off cancer cells. But with cortisol, so high cortisol, it actually down regulates those tumor suppressor genes.
Got it.
So that's a big deal when we think like, yes, our body should be able to fight it. But most of us are living off this high adrenaline, high cortisol. We wake up with our crazy long to-do list, go, 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 go all the time. And that's actually a very common theme with everyone I see in my practice. They take care of everyone else. They're the caregivers. They don't ask for help. They run these crazy busy lives and they are like, what? Sit down and do nothing for 5 minutes? Like what? That sounds stressful to me. So you can see how that cycle happens where the immune system just does not have a chance when your cortisol is through the roof.
Now that's kind of addressing adults. There are anomalies and there are pediatric cancers to me that baffle me. So is part of that just DNA, pathways, environment?
Exactly. Yeah. So of course, childhood cancers would be usually like 3-4 generations back, what they're picking up on. But usually there is a genetic mutation there where they do have the onset a lot earlier. Yeah, there's a lot of, sorry, what was the question with childhood cancers?
I mean, we can blame a 6-year-old with cancer because he smoked in his 20s. He had environmental, a lot of things. But in a child with pediatric cancer, it's not necessarily, he hadn't had a real long life to have a poor lifestyle. So it has to be something I was saying like DNA.
Yes.
I guess environment too. I mean, I don't know.
All of it. And even from, if I was to compare my practice from 15 years ago to the past 5 years, it used to be only 60, 70-year-olds coming in with cancer.
Yeah.
Now my whole practice is pretty much in their 30s, in their 40s. So
Wow.
young people. And I attribute a lot of that to just what the generations back. So what their parents did, these genetic mutations. And even when I look at epigenetics, there's something called the COMT SNP, which tells us how we deal with cortisol and deal with stress. Some people, they live off of this adrenaline and then they can break it up and metabolize really well. Whereas other people, it creates this whole inflammatory storm. So you're right, genetically, there could be two smokers. The one who has this really great detoxifying genetic profile, can deal well with stress. You look at them and they're like, how is that fair? Like we're doing the exact same things, but epigenetics play a huge role in how our body can deal with those environmental, hormonal, stressful, any kind of stress in your life.
Dr. Gabor Mate, in his book, he published it last year, and fascinating, absolutely fascinating. He and his son, I think, co-authored it. And he spent some time, I believe he's an Eastern European Jew, and he talked about Holocaust survivors. They weren't the ones with the illnesses, it was the offspring of the mothers who had been through the concentration camp. And he talked about the epigenetics and how we carry things with us, even though we think, but I wasn't, the offspring wasn't a part of the concentration camp, but the mother was. And there's something about, I mean, there, is it nurture or nature? We know it's both, right? In everything, but there is a strong genetic component. What's your opinion then on some of these genetic testings that can really look at pathways and the way you metabolize things and all? And maybe you can name a couple of them that you like.
Yeah. Oh, it's a really important part of personalized medicine because, as you know, everyone is given kind of an algorithm in conventional medicine. You have this diagnosis, you do this X, Y, and Z. But even in the natural world, too, a lot of people are taking curcumin, for example. So
Yeah.
really great for the liver and anti-inflammatory. But if you have a mutation in the CYP2C9 variation, so with how your liver goes through phase 1, phase 2, curcumin is something that you actually shouldn't do because
Wow.
it could actually make more toxic metabolites. So things like that. And then same with someone who with breast cancer or a hormonal cancer being on tamoxifen, you want to look at the CYP2D6 genetic profile. So you can see like how your body's breaking that up. Even with how you deal with radiation, there's certain like the ATM mutation genetically. If they cannot repair their own cells and then they go through all this oxidative stress like chemotherapy and radiation, it can actually make the cancer come back more aggressive later.
Wow.
So all of these really important things. And same with another genetic one. Everyone likes to go on the keto diet, right? And high fats are really important. But genetically, you want to look if you have the ApoE genetic variation.
Right.
And that'll tell us what types of fats, how much fat you should have, and even looking at like insulin levels, ketones, hemoglobin A1C, homocysteine. Like there's a whole list of things we can know instead of being like, yes, this is the diet that's great for everybody, or this is the treatment that everyone should have. We need to look at how each person individually is going to react to these therapies.
Now, do you like Dr. Jen Simmons? I interviewed, and she likes I think it's called DNA 360. Is that one that you like, or do you have a favorite?
Yeah, the one that I like it's called Nutrition Genome. I can give you a link later. I'm pretty sure I get a discount code for that. But
Good.
I like it because it does address a lot of the metabolism issues, like detoxing, and like where you need to focus in on your health, right? Like, do we need to really amp up the antioxidants, or do we need to do a really heavy protection protocol if you were to go through radiation? Even people who fly a lot. I have quite a few pilots in my practice too, people who their livelihood is flying. And they don't realize they've been exposed to radiation for decades and decades.
Yes.
So genetically, we can see like where to really focus in on and to support them. So then even if they are in remission or don't ever want to have a cancer diagnosis, there's things that they can implement to protect them on a cellular level.
So do you then, when someone comes to you and says, Dr. Lori, I've got the BRCA gene, which is the breast cancer gene that gives them a higher risk for both breast and ovarian cancer, correct?
Exactly.
And I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, and they have high BRCA genetics. I've never been told, and I've done some of these tests, but I'm saying I've heard it in my group of people, right? Is that a death sentence to you? Is that an immediate rip out all your girl parts and run on fire through a rice field? What do you say to somebody when they come to you and say, this is what I have?
Yeah, so the BRCA 1 and 2, it's another tumor suppressor gene, like I was saying. So they are going to be 4 to 5 times higher risk of getting a cancer diagnosis. But does that mean you should preventively rip out all of your stuff and chop everything off and just say, okay, I'm destined to have this? No, if you are a person listening and you know that you have the BRCA mutation and you don't want to change your life, you want to drink every day, like have alcohol all the time, it's stressful. It's like if you're the person that's like doesn't want to change anything about their lifestyle or learning anything to enhance the immune and support, then maybe that would be a good option, right? Because then you can't get cancer if that organ's not there. But then how far do you go? And just realizing we have over 1,000 types of tumor suppressor genes. So just because you have mutation in that one Right. And so for people who don't have that mutation in BRCA1, doesn't mean you don't have, like, where does it end? Right. Like
Right.
looking at the genetics and saying, oh, I could be predisposed to this. So now I'm going to like chop off my head because I don't want
Yeah.
brain cancer.
No, you're exactly right. You have to stop some of the nonsense. And of course, that's a very individual decision for somebody. But I've lived a lot of years, people, and I have learned, I just hear all the time what happens, the consequences of making decisions. And those women can't get their parts back and could have maybe altered the consumption of alcohol or other things, which brings me to Dr. Daniel Amen just recently in a social media. I mean, he's been saying it for a while. There's probably a target on his back now, but he's just saying alcohol has so many risks of cancer that we've really never heard about. Because remember, we were told to get the resveratrol in that glass of red wine, and everybody at the nursing home was drinking Malbec with their Ensure, right? So now I think we've pulled back on some of that and realizing that could have been promoted by the grape growers of California. I always follow the money. But what's your opinion then, especially postmenopausal women and alcohol? I'm not seeing too many things that support it. What's your opinion?
No. And there's so many layers into answering that question because the type of alcohol is also important to know. You're right. Like if they're sprayed with tons of pesticides, like the grapes and the wine that you're drinking, and it's very inflammatory, or if it's high sugar versus the low sugar type, there's a lot to that. And also depends of looking at alcohol as a drug, right? Like what are you using that for? If it's for high stress and just to relax at the end of the day, what else can you be doing differently? Because absolutely anything oxidative stress on the system has the ability to turn these cancer cells on. Like there's no doubt about that. However, I just had someone in my practice, she's 80 and she's so sweet and she has a cancer diagnosis. And she says that she has a little glass of red wine, low sugar, totally organic without all the stuff. She has a little, a glass of wine with her husband, who's also maybe like 84. They sit on their front porch with the sun shining. And they say like they've been doing this for years and years and years. And then they go and cuddle after. And they just have this like
that is so
beautiful
sweet
relationship. And I'm thinking, if that's, we've come up with some other drinks that she could have. Maybe Monday to Friday, she can do like a mint, like with Zevia, like some other carbonated, have healthier patterns. But yeah, a lot of it has to do with genetics, but also looking at what is that alcohol doing? And if you're in a very like calm, this is part of, I don't see that as a huge issue. I know most doctors will be like, absolutely no alcohol. But if it's part of like, you go out twice a year with your girlfriends and you are having a couple glasses of something and it's totally clean, low sugar, gin is a healthier alcohol, choosing the types, then different scenario than, okay, I'm high cortisol, high stress, and I'm doing this just to like knock myself out and then be depressed.
No, I totally see that. Scenario. And it brings into play, we really understand the whole individual. That means the oxytocin she gets from cuddling with someone. We know that as seniors age, isolation puts them at a risk for dementia and cancer. Well, she has somebody there in a loving relationship. She's probably getting that sunlight in her eyes that I tell my clients all the time, either morning or evening. She's probably drinking in the evening, probably not in the morning. Well, good. That helps set her melatonin, which helps her sleep through the night, which helps bring down the cortisol. So you just see that how complete we are and how holistic it is. And it's not just, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can't 100%. Say, well, nobody can drink.
Exactly. And another patient recently where she was doing everything right. Everything is, like doesn't drink, has everything organic, keto, like very clean eating. And she has a autoimmune condition where her rheumatoid arthritis just completely like seizes her up, becomes completely stiff. And so she could go like weeks feeling completely fine. But as soon as her dad comes into the room, she's in her 50s and she's, a grown woman. And she's like, I still have, like, even hearing him come, she will be inflamed and stiff for days. So you think about that cortisol, like subconscious, and she's like, he used to beat me when I was a kid.
Oh,
He used to put me down and mental, emotional abuse. And he's not like that anymore because there's a bit of dementia. So he doesn't remember that. So I
yeah.
totally forgive him. Like,
Right.
I'm not
Right.
angry at him. But just like
It,
Gabor Mate says in his
yes.
books too, right? Like those for her, it was a larger trauma. Those traumas are so ingrained in her that it's creating this whole systemic effect, right? So yeah, you have to look at the whole picture and get rid of toxicities in every way that you can.
Yeah. What he says in that book that's so fascinating is that trauma is not the experience, it's the response from the trauma.
Yeah.
And my family even noticed it this week because I was raised in addiction and abuse and a terrible childhood. I married the man of my dreams, been happily married for 35 years. But we were riding together in the car the other day, and I jumped in to diffuse what I thought was conflict. And my husband and son, my husband argues like an attorney. My son's an engineer who argues like an engineer. So they were having this conversation, and my husband said, "Lisa, you don't have to come in and put a wet blanket on it." And I said, "Oh, am I doing that?" And he said, "You've been doing it for 35 years." And he said, "You've been out of that crazy family for 35 years. I said, "Isn't that interesting what a trauma response does? That even though I'm safe, I feel totally safe with him, my kids, it's the response." And that's what that book, people need to read The Myth of Normal. It is really, really good. And I think a lot of people could benefit from it. I didn't mean to say that about me. It's just that I figured other people could understand. So that
Totally.
probably that probably put me in high cortisol, even though nothing was going on. Y'all, they were talking about biblical thing, what the Bible says, and not everyone's going to agree, right? We just know a
Yeah.
few things are facts and other things are like interpretations. But it was just my nature to come in and go, what are we going to eat lunch? I did something to divert it. I can't remember.
But yeah, there's an actual ACE score. You've probably heard of the adverse childhood, right? Just to see,
I'm a
yes. And so if
7.
maybe
Yeah,
even in the womb, when you're in the womb, you had these very traumatic, right?
that's
Your
right.
mom could have been
Yeah,
dealing with a lot of stuff and you're born into this fight or
yeah,
flight, having to
that's right.
fix everything.
That's right. And I've talked about it on my podcast, all my autoimmune conditions. Often people with high ACE scores have lots of autoimmune conditions that they manifest, which is so interesting that even my vitiligo, my red-haired daughter, who is very, very, very fair skin, you can hardly see it. She's had a perfect childhood. I mean, she's married to the man of her dreams. She's got 2 great kids, but some of the epigenetics that she's carried, she has vitiligo.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's very interesting.
Yeah. And like you said, too, even with the perfect scenario and the perfect upbringing and
Yeah.
a lot of that has to do with how that person perceives it, right? So
Oh, for
same
sure.
kids could have totally different reactions
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah.
and seeing what could actually benefit them from that. So there's a behavioral specialist. I don't know if you've heard of Dr. John DeMartini.
Mm-mm.
He would be great on your show. He is one of the most intelligent doctors when it comes to neutralizing these traumatic events. So he'll take you
Oh.
through what triggers you, what
Oh my
gets
gosh.
you really stressed out. And even like I see this a lot with patients going through scan anxiety and, I have
Yeah,
to update their blood work and just getting very overwhelmed
for
of like
sure.
what's going to happen. He goes through a whole methodology on how you can neutralize the sympathetic nervous system and how to actually turn it into gratitude for the event, which gratitude obviously is a huge healing benefit if you're able to capitalize on that. But
Wow.
so he'll take like just say someone was abused when they're younger and then they had to like close up and become more of an introvert and do things their own way and was fear of all these other things. He would actually go break it down on how is this benefiting you now. Maybe you became a financial guru and you're super successful in life because you've had to set those boundaries. Maybe you've chose a relationship, become closer with certain people because you didn't want to just open up to everyone, but you actually had this really intimate reaction or relationship with someone else. or even how it affects your health. And you say, okay, now I have to put me first and do things for myself. So switching all these negative experiences and putting them into what can I be super grateful for because this happened. And I see that a lot with cancer, where they get this diagnosis where all of a sudden they go into this like death sentence and I'm doomed and all of that. But then all of a sudden they become super close with their family members. They see the love and support that they never got before, or they never even knew how to ask. So it's bringing out all these amazing things where they're like, wow, I'm here today. I can switch my perspective on this. So instead of cancer being a curse or an autoimmune condition or this being a curse, how can I love myself and my surroundings more?
Spell his last name.
DeMartini, DeMartini. I actually spent a whole weekend with him doing what's called the breakthrough method.
Oh,
and
wow.
anyone who has like, you know, I think therapy and going to psychologists, like really great, like talk therapy, you know, like the more you understand yourself, the better. But there becomes a point where you're like, I don't want to talk about this shit anymore. And I just want to move on.
Right.
And not be triggered by it. So I've done this with a few of my family members who used to very much trigger me, and everything they'd say, I'd be like, oh, it's so frustrating. But now I look at it completely different. I have a whole different mindset around it. And you could do this really with anyone or anything that triggers you or something that you think you should have and don't have. And yeah, he has a podcast too, so you can really get some great advice from that. But
going to stalk him completely after we hang up. I mean, doing the deep dive.
Yeah, he's life-changing, like completely. I've never met anyone like that. And he's done the research. He knows how it's all connected. He's phenomenal. Yeah.
I love it. Can't wait. Okay, let's talk about what happens. What's the percentage of the population now getting diagnosed with cancer? All ages. What is it?
Yeah, so it's 1 out of every 2 people will have a cancer diagnosis. And until we realize that this is actually in us and part of us, then there's no cure. Like there's not going to be a cure for cancer. All this research to find like targeted therapies and all these things. We need to know that this is part of a normal cell metabolism, and there's something off with our immune system midway through the cell cycle that's not catching this proliferation cancerous rate. So cancer is 1 out of every 2 people will get it. So you or I, well, you like, I know it's a matter of time. I don't think anyone is immune to cancer. I think the older you get, you either die with it. Like some people don't even know that they have a cancer brewing and they've passed away from other things.
Right.
So it is something that we have to look at, how every day in your life you can do things a little bit differently. So we're not encouraging this cancerous momentum that's over time is likely bound to happen to every single one of us, right?
Is there cancer in the wild? I know domesticated animals get them, but do animals in the wild get cancer?
That's a good question. They must, but maybe not. Like
I
you
don't
think
know.
about even the fasting techniques that animals do when they're sick.
That's what I'm
innately
thinking.
know what to do. Yeah, that's a really good question to have a wild. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, I use that same argument because Dr. Jason Fung, the father of intermittent fasting, talks about in the wild, there is no obesity, but there is with domesticated animals. So it made me think of the way we know what feeds cancer is a constant barrage of glucose and insulin. And those animals are eating in an ancestral way of eat, stop, eat, which is what I try to encourage people to do because it mitigates, well, we know high insulin.
Yeah.
Like I said, insulin's a smoking gun. It's really the cause of so many illnesses. And so it just made me go down the next step of, well, if they don't have obesity is a huge risk for cancer.
Yeah.
And we can't talk about it because we have to have body positivity. Which is such a disservice to that person going, it's okay, you're obese, you look great. But let me tell you all the diseases you're going to have. Type 2 diabetes, kidney stones, PCOS, cancer, dementia. But go ahead and be positive. That's just silly.
Yeah, like the confidence, like that's a whole different conversation. And I agree. It's on a whole metabolic level, knowing insulin is a growth factor. And yeah, the more often you're eating, the more calories you're eating, absolutely it's connected to chronic diseases, inflammation, and absolutely with cancer. That's a big deal. You're right. And I think everyone should be, even females underneath the 25% fat adipose level.
Yeah.
Anything higher than that, you are at risk for more chronic diseases. So even increasing muscle mass, right?
Yeah.
So how that can have a tumor suppression effect and
Wow.
anti-inflammatory. Yeah, or myokines, it's a protein produced from the muscle. The more muscles that you have has an overall protective effect for all inflammatory conditions. So adding that into the day or into the week, right? Like how often can you just get your muscles burning can be such a big part. Because I was reading too, it's sometimes not even just the adipose alone that predisposes someone to these chronic diseases. It's the ratio to how much muscle they have as well. So if you have higher muscle tone and you have a higher fat mass, it can actually be protective against that fat mass. So it's the obese individuals that don't have any muscle on them at all, then they're the ones at higher risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we age, we know for women, postmenopausal women, how we lose 1% of our muscle mass after the age of 40. Girl, I'm in that gym. I'm in that gym. And it's funny, my perspective changed when I was in my 20s. I was looking at calories. How silly, but it's all we had, right? It was the barometer we were told. And then probably in my 30s and 40s, I've always exercised something, but now I don't know what I weigh. I always say I only know what I weigh when I go for my bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, my pellet. She goes, hop on that scale. And it's the same number it was the last time and the last time and the last time. So I don't really care, but I'm really focusing now on lifting weights. Dr. Bickman says walking 10 minutes after a meal to bring glucose and lifting weights.
Yeah.
My husband, it looks like a former NFL player, and that's why I have low fasting insulin because I just kick butt, fasting. He's kind of he's okay, but it's because he lifts so much weights. That also helps push that glucose to the cells. So again, it just shows how we're fearfully and wonderfully made and everything works together. Nothing's isolated. That's what I think we thought at one time, that if we did one thing, but then if we do the workout, then we also need to watch what we eat. And then we also need to watch how much sunshine we get. I'm sure you're saying the same things.
Yeah. And it's interesting how you ask. I'm just like still thinking about the animals in the wild. I'm like,
okay, go ahead.
I was just really thinking about, when just think a predator of a tiger or something is chasing after an animal, just say, I don't know, a zebra. After they have this like mad dash chase, you would think after your life is being threatened like that.
Oh.
You think about the cortisol and even how these animals deal with stress, right?
Yes.
Like they just go on and like as soon as the predator leaves, they just start eating the grass again and they're like as if nothing happened. And then you think of humans, how we're like thinking about it for days.
We're hyped up.
Sleep.
Yes.
Right. And so it's that repair method where it's even people who work out too much, like you can take it as a signal of how your body's repairing. Like these marathon runners, you're like, how did they get cancer? I don't understand.
Yeah.
But their adrenals are so shot from literally being chased by a predator
all the time
and not repairing. So they don't let their body rest and repair. So yeah, if someone's listening, they're like, oh man, I exercise and it takes me like a week to recover. It's like, that's another part of how your adrenals are functioning. Maybe you don't need to go so hard. Maybe genetically too, your body's not breaking down that cortisol and stress hormone.
Yeah, we learned that at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition about the woman who was training for the New York City Marathon. And my listeners have heard me tell this, but I just think it's so profound. And she had trained for 9 months. She ran 40 to 90 miles a week. She gained 26 pounds. Wait, what? She handed in her food journal. It was pristine, but she was in her 40s. That was too much of the tiger being chased by the tiger. She didn't give herself the time to just eat the grass and rest.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then she was so worried about her food. See, the people who do all the food journaling too, and the calorie or the counting, and people always ask me, do you want me to hand in my food diary? And I go, oh no, but let's not know. I go, the only reason I care about what you're eating is if you wake up the next day and you say you can't breathe, or you snored in the middle of the night, or you belched, or you're bloated. Then I say there's something you ate. But the people who keep such fastidious notes, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, simmer
Stress.
down, people.
Yeah, it's too much. And I do like it, checking ketones is important,
Yeah.
like looking at glucose.
Yeah.
But all of these diet diaries, the whole point is to look at the trends and to see how is your body reacting in this situation. When you're fasting, how can it handle it? But you're right. It's like if you are fasting too long, your liver is going to start producing glucose as a protective mechanism. And same with over exercising. How is that causing more inflammation? So yeah, tracking is good to know, but you're right. It can go way off the handle where it's like, it's another stress. And how do you live? How can you have time to live when
That's why I don't do the Aura ring. I don't, I meet regularly with someone. He's like, well, he checks his ring. And I'm like, you'll know if you had a good night's sleep because the next day you'll wake up either on time or you're still tired. I don't need all that. That's just too much for me, but we're all wired differently, which is great. Okay, now let's talk about if Dr. Lori got a cancer diagnosis, what's the first thing you would do?
I would move to Tahiti and chill on the beach. I would be on the beach and chilling. Every time I see someone, I have that in my head. I'm like, oh, I've done this and I've done that. And like they end up with cancer. What can I? So I'm constantly investigating myself throughout this process too. And when I give advice of saying like, oh, you work too much and and then I'm like, so do I work too much. I think that life work balance, I still have a struggle with. And I think anyone who's super passionate about what they do and what they love. So do I see that as like, something I would change if I had cancer? Probably not, because anything that really enlightens you and excites you, I think that is a really powerful thing to health, right? So doesn't mean because you have cancer, you should just like stop doing all the things that keep you busy, right? That you love. I would constantly, like I'm already every 3 months, I get my blood work checked. I look for pre-cancerous markers. So it's not just like wait till you get a cancer diagnosis to get your blood work done. But I'm always constantly looking at growth factors. I'm looking at blood sugar regulation. I look at my inflammatory rates, even things like fibrinogen and clotting factors. Every time I make a change in my lifestyle, I want to check my blood work again. Because I remember I was doing high fat, keto, HIIT training literally 4 days a week. My platelets went through the roof. My ESR my inflammatory markers went through the roof. That was not the lifestyle for me. So I had to like cool the jets and do more meditation, breathing, still having more fats, but not as high as I was doing. So constantly tweaking the plan. And I would probably, if I had cancer, likely do every single month until my blood work looked perfect. I would get circulating tumor cells checked, so like blood biopsies. I would have my markers for that and knowing which therapy I need to intervene. So just say I was low iron and had like a hypoxic environment, maybe I'd want to do more hyperbaric chambers and oxygen enriched therapies, right? So I would constantly just be tweaking based on what my blood work is showing me.
So the platelet thing, is that why we should go and give blood quarterly?
Like giving blood is such a therapeutic thing to do if your iron levels are normal and your ferritin levels are high. So there's actually a lot more research coming out on the active, it's called apoptosis, where so cancer cells love iron. And so any type of therapy where it's addressing kind of the accumulated iron stores, then that's going to be a beneficial thing. Bacteria also love iron too. So you can have really low iron in the blood, but high ferritin, so the stored iron could be really high. And so there's certain therapies you can do, like high dose vitamin C can have that cytotoxic effect, right? But yeah, blood dumping and donating, really great way to get that ferritin down.
Especially for men. It seems like men run the risk and really need to do it more than women. And I can't, maybe the way they metabolize ferritin, I can't remember. Dave Asprey, I've heard him talk about it. would you do the vitamin C therapy is what cancer fighter Owens talked about and other brave guests on my podcast.
Mhm.
Would you do that prophylactically?
No, probably
Okay.
not. No,
Okay.
mistletoe. I would do mistletoe therapy,
Now, what is
where
that?
mistletoe it's basically, it is mistletoe, like Christmas mistletoe.
Yeah.
And it's grown on 3 different types of host tree, but it's a semi-parasitic plant. And when you look it up, mistletoe actually looks like a tumor growing on a tree. So it's interesting how it grows inwards, like a tumor would, right? They use this therapy more commonly in Europe, and they use it along like mainstream, along chemo, along radio, like all the other things. But it is a cytotoxic agent, so it actually directly puts these cancer cells into apoptosis. It's anti-inflammatory. It'll help with balancing the immune system. So I use it quite a bit on autoimmune patients as well, especially if
Oh,
they have cancer and an autoimmune
okay.
condition, because you don't want to overstimulate, right? You want to help modulate the immune. And so mistletoe actually helps a lot with the quality of life symptoms. So people who are like, oh, I'm too tired, or I'm depressed, or I don't have energy, mistletoe is a really great agent. So if I found my neutrophils were low, lymphocytes are low, all my white blood cells were really low, and I needed that marrow support, mistletoe would be a really great one to do. I would do like preventatively, so something else doesn't come later, like a cancer diagnosis. So I'm really huge on checking my blood work constantly, so then I can put in protocols. I don't think one person should be on the same thing
Right.
for the rest of their life,
I
right?
agree.
But tweaking it and being responsive and seeing what your body actually needs to do.
Well, let's talk about apoptosis. That's something that we kind of throw around in the intermittent fasting world when you get your PhD. I feel like I have my PhD in fasting. But that's one of the things that I really haven't touched enough on, or gluconeogenesis. The magic, autophagy obviously is a magical time and won the Nobel Peace Prize for Medicine in 2016 by a Japanese researcher. But apoptosis, that's the cellular death, right? That happens with the fasting process.
Yeah, so autophagy, it's basically what the cells, healthy cells or abnormal cells, are needed in order to, it's like a programmed cell death, exactly. So healthy cells go through this all the time. Every cell in our body has a certain lifespan, whether it's our skin cells, our eyes, our gut, every organ, every tissue, they all have a certain lifespan. Cancer cells just miss that memo. They're not getting that self-destruct, so they keep proliferating, and that's the entire problem with cancer. It's a completely different metabolism, and they keep growing, and they have higher insulin receptors. They don't use glucose the same. They don't use as much ATP or produce as much ATP. It's just a very flawed system. So when you can use agents like the mistletoe, high dose vitamin C, curcumin can act like that, EGCG from green tea. There's a lot of things that you can do naturally to help drive these cancer cells into the programmed cell death. And that's really the goal, is to completely protect your healthy cells, not damage every cell in the body, but the ones that are programmed differently and have this metabolic flaw, then the things like high dose vitamin C will completely help with killing off cancer cells without affecting healthy cells.
Well, Dr. Thomas Seyfried says that if a person does a 7-day water fast, that they've reduced their cancer load, I think, by 95%, which what's the longest fast you've done?
Yeah. I mean, when I was 14, I did a with my mom, and I'm telling you, my mom had me I had my first colonic at 11.
I
I was
love
doing
her.
doing all these crazy things, thinking this is mental. We went to the cottage together, and we bought 85 lemons. We did the master cleanse with maple syrup. We went for
Yes.
10 days. And at this point, I was like, am I being punished? What's happening? And I became extremely miserable. I think, depressed. I didn't want to talk to her. It was
Yeah.
day 5, day 6. And then in the middle of the night, I went and got an orange because I was like, I'm going to sneak this orange that's off the master cleanse and have this. So I did a lot of things wrong. And I had a really bad impression of fasting growing up because I saw it as like, oh, you need to lose weight and, not eat. And I saw it as just like not feeling good, but I wasn't doing it the proper way. So now that I understand the whole premise of why you fast, how to like prepare for a fast, how to properly break a fast, what you can do to transition back to foods. Right now, the longest I've done is a 5-day water fast. And I just felt like for me personally, I started to lose muscle. And I didn't like feeling too weak. And I looked in the mirror, I'm like, oh, I didn't have the energy, even though I like felt amazing mentally. Like I was on top of my game. You know, you feel really good when you fast, but I'm used to lifting weights and doing more exercise, and you can't get those amino acids and repair properly if you fast too long. So.
Yeah, I've done, I did 5-day last summer, and day 4, I was time for my labs anyway. And my glucose was 52. And so I'm sure day 5 it was under. And, that gets a little, Dr. Mindy Pell says at that point you should break it. But I think I'm going to incorporate twice yearly 3-day fasts because it can be done. I can do that. If I feel well before, eat, and I eat well anyway, but high fat foods, nutritious, delightful, and all that. But there is a risk in the refeed that I have to have like bone broth and watermelon. Otherwise, you are going to have disaster pants, is what Dave Asprey calls it, because it will upset your tummy. But
yeah. And I actually really like the research by Dr. Walter Longo, who talks more about fasting mimicking and how that can be beneficial. Because some people, they'll go on these 3-day, 5-day water fasts and like, I'm going to squash all these cancer cells and do such a beneficial thing. And then right after, they're like, food, and they just want to eat everything and they have no control. So in that case, just caloric restriction, maybe once a month of doing a 5-day fasting mimicking plan can also get your body into autophagy, start producing ketones.
It does.
Lower insulin.
How does it do that though if you're still feeding it? That has always baffled me.
It's so low. Like your protein levels are under 20 grams a day, like maybe even 10. Your carbohydrate net carbs are under 20, like in such a low amount. And so, it's like 5 pieces of spinach. It's like you're not getting one. And it is a little bit of form of its own torture of like, I can have just like 5 of these things. So it's tough, but it's for the people who need a little bit of energy, like through glucose, like they're working and they can't be in this like rest and relaxed space. So personalizing again, right? Like medicine for one could be torture and inflammatory for someone else.
Thanks for listening to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe and download all the episodes and leave a review, won't you? The Lisa Fisher Said podcast is produced by ClantonCreative.com.